Some of you have seen my photo mashups that I did, which is kind of blending old photos with the new ones. I think the exhibition is still in the library, and it was really nice. It was a great little kind of experiment. But then a few weeks ago, I don't know, I had the idea of kind of doing it, but with sort of like moving images. So rather than, because the thing is when you mash up an old photo and a new one and it's a static image, you don't kind of see what's behind the old one. So you kind of see where the old building would have been, but you don't see what it looks like today. So I decided to use a very advanced technology called animated GIF, if you're not familiar with it. But basically you take 2 or 3, how many images you want, and you can then just kind of have a transition, like a faded transition between them. And it's quite interesting when you kind of do that sort of transition from old photos to new photos to old photos. You all know this sort of obviously sort of stretch of Church Street, kind of old lovely sort of buildings with probably our most famous sort of ghost sign. Right. And it's quite nice when you do this sort of transition. I mean, for me, the nice thing is, first of all, you can see the ghost sign that has multiple sort of layers on it. So you can clearly see the Westminster Gazette as well. You can see before the Old Shillelagh, which was originally the Horse and Groom, was a pub. It was a beer shop as well. I mean, if you think about the kind of the layout of a pub, obviously the Old Shillelagh is more like a little corner shop, which sort of gives it its sort of charm today. Still same stretch and section. This is 1922. I mean, people complain about the roadworks now, right? I mean, imagine that in the council Twitter feed. What's with all the cattle and sheep just coming down? And yeah, I think someone told me that they were just being marched down to the local butchers on, I think just where the plumbing shop is on the high street. Yes. So I don't know if that's the case or not, but you can also see the old bus. Again, the nice go sign. Still the same area as well. I mean, you must have walked past that house 1,000 times, right? And it doesn't look very interesting, doesn't look very inviting. I was quite surprised years ago to find that that entire sort of house was originally single occupancy. This is what it used to look like. And it's still there, if you kind of see it, the windows, layout, and so on. The thing is that a lot of those houses, the ones that survived, they basically, the Victorians just erected these sort of shop extensions. Just opposite that, this was the view. Right? Today it looks a bit different. Looks like this. But that's the exact same spot. Next one, this was Abney Chapel, just facing the cemetery. Looks a bit different today. It was bombed during the Blitz. It was a congregational chapel, and then a newer sort of church was built, didn't look as grand. And just opposite that one, this is the view we know today. This is what it used to look like. This was Abney House. This was the manorial estate. Sir Thomas Abney and Lady Mary Abney, that was their house, built in 1700, demolished in 1843. The gate, by the way, the Iron Gate is still the original one from 1700. This was obviously one of the mansions in Stoke Newington. Right next to it, another lovely mansion, a lovely sort of brutalist style that I like very much. But next to Abney House was Fleetwood House, a 60-room mansion. It was knocked down in 1872. But from Fleetwood House to this. Does anyone know where this is in Church Street? You got the numbers, so you can kind of guess. Yeah, you don't see that in the estate agent sort of brochure from that period. So that whole row of shops, obviously a lot of those were crumbling old buildings. I'm guessing that for various sort of reasons they decided not to either renovate and sort of keep them, so the school got extended. This is our lovely town hall that Andy's going to talk about at length as well. Those of you who attended sort of previous talks know that the town hall was built in 1935 to 37 on the site of Church Row. So those were originally 9 houses, then 8 when they enlarged the old graveyard. Very big, sort of fine houses, but by the 30s, the people that could afford to live in them moved further fields. This is Stoke Newington Jungle. Anyone knows where this is? So this is 187 High Street. The original building was built in 1712. It was one of the oldest buildings alongside the two next to it, so 189 and 191. It stood derelict for, as you can see, clearly that was not someone's eccentric garden, you would hope. It basically was completely vandalized. There's photos from the inside. It was completely sort of crumbling. In 1983, it was completely demolished, and only the facade was kept. Going down Stoke Newington Road, one of my favorite buildings. Okay, this was the Alexandra Theater, right? One of the sort of cinemas we had down the main roads. This was built in 1897. It was basically closed in 1950 and pulled down in 1960. This is the site today. Okay, it's called Alexandra Court. So they kept the name, and that's about it. I'm not sure if there's anything else from that period. Even just a sign, they could have kept a sign, something, right? So this was one of Stoke Newington cinemas, had many names, the Ambassador, Astra, Apollo. People are always surprised that it was actually built like that, with the domes. It wasn't a purposely built mosque, as it is today. I think I mentioned it in my cinema talk that I read, I'm not sure how credible, but it's a nice little anecdote, that the whole building was tiled by one person. The tons were all imported from Turkey, weighed 3.5 tons, and it took that very lucky man 6 months to do it, right? So I don't know if he just lost a bet, but that's the story behind that one. There used to be a cinema here as well. This was the Coliseum. And as I mentioned in my cinema talks, the cinemas really range in terms of class. You had the flea pit, like this one, people kind of describing sort of rats running down and sort of on. But then you had the Alexandra, you had the ABC, the ones where, I think as one lady sort of told me once, that if your date took you to one of those, you knew he was serious. Another one, which is a favorite of mine, a few years ago I gave a talk about the amazing collection that Alexander Guttridge took of Stoke Newington. So Alexander Guttridge was a shopkeeper. His family grew up in one of the poorest streets in Stoke Newington, Barn Street, if you know the one. And they basically owned the shop that is now the post office, and also a small shop at 187 where the estate agents are. He grew up in Barn Street, and just before the whole area was condemned and declared a slum clearance area, he took photos of the surrounding area of Barn Street, Lordship Terrace, and in this case, Lordship Road. So you can see again 1930s housing developments replacing very kind of small, very crowded. When you look on the map as well, those houses on Lordship Road, Lordship Terrace, and Barn Street, and a bit of sort of Edwards Lane, very, very small houses. I mentioned the Devonshire sort of square church. What's left of it today is pretty much this little bit. It used to look like this. The steeple, actually the spire I think was bombed in the Blitz, and then they kind of kept it. Then they kind of altered it quite significantly. The whole frontage was just completely out of place. And then it was completely just demolished and just kind of kept that little bit. You can just see that little thingy over here, but that's about it. And while we're on the topic of sort of churches that are long gone, this is Lounsborough Road. So the pub is just kind of where I'm standing. This was St. Faith's. So St. Faith's was on the corner of Knebworth and Lounsborough Road. Knebworth now, if you come from Neville Road, is like a bit of a cul-de-sac, and you've got the housing estate. But this is what it looked like. This is St. Paul's, West Hackney, farmers market, and a lot of other sort of great events. Interesting building, you would say, quite simple in form, proper sort of post-war development, was built in sort of early 1960s. The original building looked like this. Basically the White House. And again, it was completely sort of bombed. I think just the facade was capped. The whole bit just at the back, this photo from behind, just at the rear elevation, nothing was left. It was actually left standing like that till 1958 at least. This is Newton Greene, Albion Road. Again, interesting building. Used to look different. This was Holland House. And very similar, like Ebony House, the iron gateway still stands. So if you walk past and you just see just on that little bit here, there's a nice ornate iron sort of gateway. So that's not a mock replica, that's the original one. While we're on the topic of houses that make you go wow, this lovely empty site that I believe is going to become a building site very soon. They're going to erect a, Nick, is it like a 5-story? 5? Yeah. So there's going to be new development going on, so just appreciate it while it lasts. But this was the site of probably one of my favorite mansions. It's not something I get a chance to say very often. This was the Willows. But this was obviously a grand sort of house. It's quite amazing as well. You can see this hallway. This was all sort of like a triangle sort of glass roof, right? All this. So you came through here and you had all these sort of nice sort of features there. Paradise Bridge was just opposite. Changing scenery now. This is not far from where we are actually. This is just down Neville Road, Allen Road. Neville Road used to have about 20 shops. Right, I think now there's only the Caribbean sort of restaurant, but further down the road, this was the view. And you can still see, I mean, if you look at all those buildings, there's still sort of a bit of relics of where the shops were. I think this one also has the little kind of bracket for the gas light as well. You just need to kind of have a look, and you can really see that sometimes the conversion was quite, done quite cheaply sometimes. Back to Church Street. Does anyone know where this is? Yeah, you can see where the allotments are today. That was originally the path of the course of the New River. And it was basically drained and filled in 1947. That's when the allotments were created. This was Newington Hall, basically just on the corner of Church Street and sort of Green Lanes. This is the bandstand in Clissold Park. This was the original one, as it was referred to as the rustic bandstand, right next to the house. It was burnt down and removed in 1965, and then they basically just put like a wooden stage, just like a rectangle stage for a few years. It was altered in 1914 or 1912, just sort of modernized a bit, but that was kind of the view. Still in the park, if you came into Clissold Park from Church Street, just opposite sort of Mary's Church, and you just looked on your left towards sort of Green Lanes, this would have been the view. Maybe you could have taken that little boat all the way down to kind of Green Lanes, I don't know. This is what it looks like today. So that entire sort of stretch was drained in 1958. The New River now terminates in the East Reservoir. The section in the park is basically just fed from the mains. It's just a little crescent lake in a way. If you notice, the water never moves, right? And then in the summer you get all the algae. I mentioned Paradise Bridge when I talked about the Willows. So if you think about the course of the New River, it kind of went all along Church Street, and then it got to almost towards sort of Clissold Crescent, and that's where it left the park and basically went into the Willows. And you can see that whole fencing bit, that's all part of that estate. So that building would have been just there. And this was Paradise Bridge. So this is Church Street. And this is what it looks like today. So next time you wait for the 393 and you see that little elevated sort of concrete bit just where the railings are, that's exactly the location of Paradise Bridge. This was the view from Park Lane Bridge, which was the bridge next to Paradise Bridge. It was basically just where Clissold Crescent is now. The view today is somewhat different. Okay, most of the bins. But yeah, I mean, if you walk along it, and there's still a little kind of, like a little plaque that denotes that the bridge was removed in 1931, where the road was widened. But again, very, very different landscape. Back to the High Street. That's the Victorian Police Station, quite notorious, as Alan is going to tell us. There was less sort of street furniture. People sometimes think that the pavement was wider, but when you think there were no bins, There were no sort of like jump bikes thrown everywhere and kind of rubbish everywhere and so on. They just looked wide in most cases. Just a few more. Pubs is everyone's sort of favorite topic. One of my favorites, the Red Lion on Church Street. This building actually dates back to 1924. The original pub was demolished when the road was widened. So Lordship Road was originally sort of one lane wide. So every time they had to kind of widen the roads in the 20s and 30s, in many cases the result was knocking down pubs and houses. This was the original pub. I love as well, you can see the old street sign with the pre-1917 N postcode. We were never East London. No, always north, yeah. From another angle, Stoke Newington used to have about 40 pubs in about sort of 1910. Over the years, 20 pubs closed. Some of them were converted to residential properties, some of them were completely sort of demolished. This was one of them, the one that was actually just converted. This was originally the Albion Hotel. It was the Golden Lady. I heard stories about, it was like a biker's pub and kind of all those. When you tweet those, you get a lot of sort of personal stories and memories, which are quite nice. Again, you can see the light bracket, very, very ornate. And I'll just finish with a couple more. As I mentioned, a lot of shops were basically converted and closed. I think I estimate there were about 140 shops in Stoke Newington that basically are lost now. A lot of them, some of them were demolished, some of them were just converted to flats. For example, this is on Neville Road, not far from us. Neville Road, as I mentioned earlier, used to have about 20 shops. I love the kind of the Wild West kind of feel to it. Yeah. And not from it, you have this and that. Was the bakery. This is Stoke Newington High Street. Love this photo. Ellen Road, which is just not far from here, used to have 50 shops. You saw the tailors? And it's quite fascinating to see just the conversion and how kind of, doors were removed and sort of windows changed, and it's quite incredible. But yeah, that's the same one. I've got plenty more, but obviously we don't want to stay here all night. So thank you very much. What I'm going to do now, thank you.